do come in, they can still come and watch the video regardless, which is great. It looks good.
Which just reminded me to start the recording, so thanks.
The other trick is the spatial audio. Just got to remember to keep switching it back when you go up to get out of flat.
I think Tom.
Yeah, I turned it on spatial now. What I'll do when we go up there is I'll turn it on flat and we'll, mute the room.
Sounds good.
Which is about 1 minute away, so I'm gonna go do that.
Yeah, good. All right. I'm going on mute.
That's a great setting, and I know you got to keep typing it to get advanced to each of the different views and angles, but we're hoping to keep improving that as well. It's just nice to be able to do that, those camera angles, though.
Absolutely.
With that one camera, the cinematic, how do you go up and down? Sorry, you cut out.
Sorry, what did you say?
No, Brad cut out. I was
sorry.
Go up and down.
You would just point your mouse up, navigate like you would normally. I think they're trying to start, so they're muting the mics. But just your W key or your arrow key, use that to navigate camera angle view.
Right, got it. Okay.
Cool, I got it. Thank you, Tom. Thanks, guys.
All right, looks like everybody's here. I'm going to mute the audience one more time. I think I've got my assistant somewhere in the corner from Verbella over here who said they were going to be muting people for me. So welcome. This is a new platform for us, and we're giving it a shot. Welcome to the next evolution in law, which is the VRAR Chicago Meetup. We'll get used to doing a little bit of control here. Does everyone see the raise hand button? If you don't mind, I'm going to ask how many of you have actually been to this event in the past, if you don't mind raising your hand. And it looks like a decent number of you. Wow, my whole list of people is going green at the moment. So that's great. I'm going to ask you all now to actually put your hands down because we'll be using that feature. So that was kind of a little practice for Q&A later. So anyway, that said, welcome. The format of the event here, I'll just go over some housekeeping really quick. We are asking everybody in the audience to please keep your mics muted. When we get to Q&A, I will be calling on you before we actually ask you to speak. So you're going to want to effectively unmute your mic, give it a second, and then at that point you can speak, ask your question, and then we'll remute you before people start to answer. Beyond that, we have some people we have to welcome. So the format tonight is, again, this is about the audience, and we do actually have audience on Facebook Live, and I've got a question from Facebook Live that I'm going to respond to right now, which is someone who was saying that they could not find us in AltSpace. That's because we are not in AltSpace today. We are in Verbella. So if you'd like to come and join us in Verbella, we're in the main auditorium. But otherwise, you can keep watching us on Facebook Live because we do have a significant number of viewers on Facebook Live, and I will be monitoring that chat. So those of you who couldn't make it in the platform, if you have questions, feel free to ask them and we'll bring them in. That said, we got some good lawyers here who are going to present some great information for you. They're all going to talk for just about 10 minutes each, just to give you an idea of what their sort of area of expertise is and what questions they're going to be able to answer towards immersive technology and the law. And then at that point, we will go to questions and answers because ultimately this is about you guys getting your questions answered. So they're here to kind of present their area of expertise so you know who to direct which questions to. But at the end of the day, this entire event is more about you guys and helping you move forward and get your questions answered. With that said, we would not be able to do this event without our sponsors. So We have a couple of really nice sponsors that help us get this thing going, and some of them are here to actually give their own little welcome message. So I'm going to start with Lauren Lemieux from Bundle AR, and then I will get out of the way. And Lauren,
Hello, good evening. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, don't forget to unmute yourself, but you were good. Go ahead.
Good, on it. Good evening. Very excited to be here in this new venue. So far, it's been a good bit of fun. I know we all discovered the dancing and wardrobe changes, so exciting to see what the future holds for this space. But to give you a little overview about Bundler, we specialize in augmented reality solutions for businesses and institutions, and we are making it incredibly easy with our augmented reality platform for these organizations to incorporate it into their training, learning, and development strategies and communications, among other things. Part of the platform consists of the content management system, the API, as well as our mobile app platform. And after many months of hard work, a couple weeks ago, we launched on both Google Play and the App Store. So it's been a very exciting month for us so far. And I will provide a link in the public chat shortly. So if you want to check out a demo pack where there are some image markers that you can test the app on, that link will be in the public channel in a moment. But we have a quick video to show you that gives you a little bit more information about Bundler and what we do. So Matt, if you want to hit play on that.
I will. Before I do, I'm just going to warn everybody, this video does tend to get a little bit loud. And again, before I play the video, one more thing, just so you guys are aware, on your interface, up at the top of the screen, there is a screen zoom. If you want to zoom in on any of the particular screens or the stage itself, you can use those buttons there. But with that, I will go to the video and shut up. Augmented reality is a technology that enables you to place digital content in the physical world with a smartphone or tablet. Video, audio, call to action digital buttons, and animated 3D objects appear in context of what the camera sees on a user's phone. By using the Bundle AR platform, businesses and institutions can effortlessly integrate immersive AR technology into their communications platforms, helping you reach your customers, employees, and vendors through an easy-to-use augmented reality content management system, API, and mobile application framework. To learn more about how Bundle AR's AR Made Easy solutions can revolutionize how you connect with your audience, please visit us at bundlear.com. All right. Go ahead, Lauren.
Yep. So, oh, here, I think I'm looking at the screen. There we go. That's a little bit about our company and our platform, and very exciting in the coming months, some of the features and products that we'll be rolling out. So please connect with us to kind of stay in the loop. And we love this community and learning all about what everybody else is doing. So please connect with us, and we look forward to listening to the presentation tonight. I am a big fan of the fine print, and I know that lawyers often are as well. So I'm very excited to see some of the things that we learned tonight. That is it. Back up. There we go.
And all right, I'm talking muted. Thank you all for that one. So our next sponsor is a little bit of a change here, because normally we do actually hold a physical event. For the last 3 years, we've been hosting a physical event at 1871 in Chicago, hence the name of the event. But obviously with COVID and pandemic happening right now, we can't host it in physical space, although we're hoping to maybe get back to some semblance of physical next, possibly even as soon as next month. But in the meantime, we do plan on going forward, always hosting this in a virtual space as well as a physical space. But that said, 1871 has been a supporter of our community for quite a while, so we do still consider them a sponsor, and they will be providing us with a physical space for the event going forward as soon as we are able to get back into physical space. For those of you who don't know, 1871 is Chicago's technology incubator. I believe they are the host to approximately 400 companies currently. And they have several programs that help companies get launched and get going, no matter whether they're in, the idea phase, just trying to figure out how to get started, or they're in a starting phase, trying to figure out how to launch and get their products to market, or if they're trying to scale. With that, I will leave it to you to go ahead and check out 1871.com for more information. We do expect that going forward, they will actually have a representative here to speak on their own behalf. I kind of gave them a little bit of very short notice on this one. As some of our other sponsors will attest to, who were basically notified today that they should be here talking. With that said, though, I will go into our next sponsor, who is providing our venue for this evening, and that is Virbela. And with that, I will introduce the VP of Marketing from Virbela, Marco, who is over here to my left, I believe.
Yep. Thanks, Matthew. Walking up now. Just want to quickly say, like Matthew said earlier, this is all about you. So thank you for joining us in Virbela. As you've experienced, Virbela builds virtual worlds for work, education, and events. We do have a few legal offices who call Virbela's team suites their home while working remotely now. So if you're interested in getting a tour of this open campus, other locations, or even our own personal office, please reach out to me or fill out the contact form on our website. And thanks again for joining us here. Hosting these events has been quite fun for us. So thanks for joining. Thanks, Matthew.
All right, thank you, Marco. And with that, we'll start going into our content. So our first expert panelist this evening is Ross Hersman, and I will actually let him pretty much introduce himself and what he does. Ross, you ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right, if you want to come on up here and let me know when you need slide changes, I will run your presentation for you, and I will sit down and stay out of the way.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Oasis. My name is Ross Hersman. I run a law practice here in Chicago called Loading Law that caters to the needs of tech entrepreneurs, everything from musicians to filmmakers to my personal favorite, independent game developers. I also run the Chicago Video Game Law Summit, which is an annual symposium that caters to the needs of all my clients, but also legal practitioners in this space. So an entire day of content just like what you're seeing tonight. When I'm not working on those two things, I'm an adjunct professor at DePaul University. I teach courses in video game law and also presentation and communication. And I'm the chair of the Illinois chapter of, the Chicago chapter of the International Game Developers Association. So we do a lot of amazing charitable work and social advocacy work for the game space, helping people get into the video game industry, helping them find good mental health and good jobs and good work-life balance in general. And the final thing on my CV here that I'll introduce is I am also the vice chair of the American Bar Association's Digital Games and New Media section. We're a committee for the American Bar Association that produces white papers to Congress and government and helps advise them on the video game industry in general. And one thing that I don't have on the slide that's also important, just because we are in Chicago, at least physically, maybe not virtually, is the Chicago Bar Association. I am the chair of the Creative Arts Committee there. Could I have the next slide, please?
You're there.
I'm there. Now, they don't seem to be showing in the presentation tool. Should I be looking somewhere else for those?
Are you looking at the side screens or the center screen?
I might be looking at the side screens, which would probably...
It should be on the sides.
Okay, right now I'm just seeing VRAR.
Okay, I'm seeing your speed run at the moment.
Okay, well, as long as I'm on that slide, I'll know what I'm talking about. So today, I want to talk a little bit about what virtual reality and augmented reality means for developers, for proprietors, and users as well. This is just a little title slide I like to use to kind of lay a roadmap for what I'd like to get into. And of course, since it's 2020 and we're all dealing with COVID and murder hornets and every other kind of adversity that we can possibly have thrown at us this year, I also want to talk about our new normal and our new virtual reality. Slide, please. So it is 2020 and we're all experiencing a new normal. As has been said already, we would normally be having an event like this at 1871, shaking hands and doing our networking in person. And so much of that has changed, not just the shaking hands, but doing this virtually. 2020 has pushed everyone into this new virtual reality where we're engaging with each other through computer screens and mobile devices. We're talking to each other through Zoom meetings, Hangouts, FaceTime, and every other platform like Verbella. Today, and it's going to, it already has and continues to drastically change our business, our learning, our socialization, and our entertainment. A lot of us are socially isolating and working from home, engaging with our coworkers and our business through a computer screen. A lot of our kids and young people are handling all of their learning in a new virtual environment, and for most of them, this is a new way that they're engaging with technology in ways they never have been before. So it's very literally a learning experience for them. From a socialization aspect, this is the way that we've been keeping in touch with each other as we've been kept apart. I've spent a lot of my time in the last 3 months sharing movies with friends, using Netflix Party and Discord, and kind of interacting with the kind of media that we like to consume in all new avenues. And that's also how we've been finding a lot of our entertainment. This has been a very, very busy time for the video game industry as we all try to create, protect, and market the content that people are craving. People are playing more and more video games because they're finding out it's a fantastic way for them to be interacting with each other and participating in an interactive activity. And a lot of them are not lifelong gamers. A lot of them are first-time gamers. So it's whole new markets and demographics engaging with all new content. Those of you who will know me in the audience will know what a big fan of Ready Player One I am. And this is the year that Ready Player One for me really moved from fiction to fact. And it's almost poetic that today the sequel Ready Player Two was actually announced and will be coming out in November. But it does seem that that dystopian reality in some ways has kind of become our reality. And as we all log on to virtual spaces and engage with each other online, that's kind of a new reality that we're all engaging with. Now, in putting together this talk today, I've been drawing on some content that we've been working on for a couple of years, but one point that I can say to kind of frame the conversations we're going to be having for the rest of the night is the law itself always lags behind technology. And as we continue to innovate, the legal system tries to regulate what we're creating and inventing. A lot of folks have asked me how, the legal system has attempted to implement virtual reality or augmented reality into the everyday practice of law. How are lawyers actually using these technologies? And practically most of the ones I know outside of tech sectors or those who specialize in tech areas are not. They're either doing business as usual or they've kind of pushed the snooze button until things return to normal. But I think that the result of everyone else using virtual reality is really going to make lawyers jump into the deep end with both feet, just like everyone else. I've already started seeing some very interesting things happening in the private sector with privacy, free speech, and employment law. I think that 2020 has just been a completely different year, unlike anything we've ever seen. It's changed the way we've all interacted with each other, the way that we do our business, the way we do our learning, the way we socialize, the way that we entertain ourselves. And with that is coming a host of new legal issues from a regulation perspective, from a litigation perspective, from a legislation perspective. So I think every lawyer in the room is going to be very busy if they're not already. I have my next slide, please. So to VR and AR developers, this means you're going to be very busy as well. When it comes to your engineering, you're going to be handling technical challenges of evolving technology. Last year, I spent some time talking about how you're going to have to adapt your practices to what kind of actual hardware you're going to be shipping on. You can add to that now in 2020, getting that hardware in people's hands. Shortages in manpower and the way that people are changing the way that they work means that there has been a lot of hardware shortages in the tech and game industries. Nintendo Switches are now the hottest commodity because as production has slowed, there's developed a gray market for people selling Switches online on Facebook and Craigslist and has made that hardware very hard to come by. If folks are not able to have the hardware that runs your game or your app in their hands, that's going to have to change how you market it or how you distribute it or how you manufacture it. That's something that if any of you are starting out now, you'll have to keep in mind. Likewise for game design, you always have to keep abreast of the latest challenges when it comes to how your games work and on what hardware. As the hardware constantly gets better and we are able to push more pixels and have higher resolutions and better frame rates, we're constantly going to be trying to conquer motion sickness and cognitive overload, emotional overload, and all of those personal nuances that make it hard for even the most able-bodied people to access games in augmented reality and virtual reality. Slide, please. Now, for VR proprietors, last year I spent a lot of time talking about contracts, commercial licenses, and insurance. And of course, all of these things are still very much crucial to your business plan and the way that you legally protect what you're doing. You are going to need a terms of service policy, a privacy policy, and waivers for your VR arcade to function. Going to need business licenses or liquor licenses or actual software licenses to run the software that you run there. And you're going to need errors and omissions insurance and a whole host of other legal protections to keep your business legitimate and functioning. But because it's 2020, there's a very good chance your VR arcade might not even have its doors open. Here in Illinois, we've begun reopening our doors in our businesses, but there's always that threat of a second spike. That has meant a lot of my clients have had to reevaluate exactly how it is they operate, how they organize the floor plans of their physical locations, what kind of games they're running, and not to put too fine a point on it, literally how they keep them sanitary and clean. Keeping your business flush in hand sanitizer and Purell could be the best legal investment you could have in keeping your business above water. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, and of course, for VR users, you always have to be cognizant about what kind of experience you're going to be having. All of the things that I've touched on, from motion sickness, cognitive overload, emotional overload, that's going to affect literally how you're interacting with the game and how that game is interacting with you, what kind of physical effects it's going to be having on your person. But in addition to that, you might have to change the way that you interact with what games you're purchasing, or your tastes for games and what kinds of games you might be purchasing might be drastically different. When you look at what's popular based on pop culture and what is kind of the genre of the moment, it ebbs and flows, and 2020 has been no exception. While Last of Us 2 is one of the most hotly anticipated games for the last 5 years and one of the best selling of this year, I can tell you a lot of folks that I've talked to have told me they've lost a lot of interest in playing a game about a pandemic because, well, we're living in one. You don't necessarily need to practice escapism to enjoy a game like Last of Us 2. On the other hand, Animal Crossing has certainly been far and away one of the most popular games for folks who do want to kind of escape a reality into a more pleasant alternate virtual reality. Additionally, one thing I always have to touch on, and some of our other speakers will dive deeper into this than I will today, is when it comes to user-generated content, IP infringement is at the forefront of any attorney's books right now. We live in a creation culture. People are always making new content, and a lot of it is innovative, but what I've found is that so much more often it tends to be imitated. We start to see technologies that imitate others, either from a technical or patent perspective, or just straight up from a copyrightable content perspective. People love making work based on other work. And whether it's Ready Player One, the book, or Ready Player One 2020 that we're actually living in, making works that imitate other works might be legally actionable and put you in a very liable position. Slide, please. Now, I always have a slide here for questions, and I think we'll be taking them at the end. But generally, I think I'm very excited to be jumping into the talk tonight and hearing all of your questions that we have. I know that they'll be from a very broad perspective of industries and qualifications and perspectives, and I'm just very eager to jump in with that. So with that is my introduction. I will yield the podium to my other speakers, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ross. And up next, I like that at least one person in the audience has found the clap feature. Up next, we have Ilya Zlatkin, who actually doesn't have much of a presentation, but he's going to talk to you all. So his slide is up currently, and with that, I will go sit down.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. I appreciate it a lot, and thank you for getting the conversation going, Ross. I think that, well, first a little bit about me. My name is Ilya Zlatkin. I run a small two-person partnership. In general terms, we do corporate and intellectual property law. And in particular, we focus on three primary verticals, which are entertainment and media, software and technology, and hospitality and recreation. And those, on the one hand, for us are, marketing niches. It's easier to get people's minds to where we want them to be by talking about specific industries rather than just saying that we do corporate and intellectual property law. But those three areas, they encompass a large portion of industry in general, I think. Certainly on the VRAR side, the software and technology, that's pretty broad ranging, and it falls into that. And then also there's overlap with entertainment and media, certainly with hospitality and recreation. So what that relates to really is that virtual reality can span certainly a broad range of what I do and what my clients do in the legal space, but also that as we go further along, I think that it'll start to appear more and more throughout various industries, various verticals. It'll be unavoidable. And it's, I don't want to go on and on about, how fast the world is changing, but I had occasion today to think about that as recently as 10 years ago, within higher education, some of you may have heard about the scandal at the University of Virginia, which is my alma mater, with the university president being ousted, really on account of arguments about online learning. And amid the COVID-19 reality, people pushing back against online learning at this point sounds pretty ridiculous. But that used to be a point of contention as recently as 10 years ago. And as Ross correctly pointed out, the law typically is pretty slow in catching up to what the industries are putting out there. And so you can imagine that for developments within the last 10 years, the laws that are being applied, they might be 25 years old. Case decisions from 25 years ago are still being cited in disputes related to VRAR technology. And so that's just the reality on the legal side of what, when you come to talk to a lawyer, of what will be needing to be factored in. Now, certainly there's been evolution in the law. Ross touched on some of that. I think on the technology side, on the intellectual property side, as far as VR is concerned, there's two primary buckets, right? There's the equipment that does the actual function of making VR, AR, XR a possibility. And JD will talk more about that as in relation to patents as well as trade secrets. That relates to a lot of the actual tech that's used for making that that happen. But then there's also the content being created, right? And I think within the last 10 years, what's really evolved is the content specifically that is being created and the purposes for which it's being created. I think some of the functions, well, first of all, I think many of you would know many functions that I don't even know about, but certainly being used within training, as a corollary to that, instruction, exhibition, for shopping and retail, but then also for business purposes, on the marketing and advertising side. It's being used for data visualization and certainly entertainment, which is kind of where it started. Maybe a little inappropriate for me to say, but I'm pretty sure that the first time that I ever heard about virtual reality was when the talk was that was the future of the pornography industry, and that's that's where everything was going. That's where the money was. And ultimately, just as everybody else, I mean, they're creating content and they're trying to commercialize it, right? So I think, as with many other things, those kinds of industries are just at the forefront of pushing the legal boundaries. Ultimately, whether it's content or technology that's being created in relation to VR, it's an asset, right? Even if it's intellectual property, we're talking about an asset. And when there's an asset, there is a question of how do you commercialize that asset, and then how do you deploy and leverage that asset after it's been commercialized. I think on the entrepreneurship side, which Ross was talking about a lot, the entrepreneur, if we're talking about either a solopreneur or somebody who is talking, having a partnership, but the question really is about resources, right? An entrepreneur probably has limited resources, and as they try to commercialize that asset, they are running into certain problems. Now, bigger organizations, they're typically not short on resources. The question really is about allocation and how behind the times that an organization might be in deploying and allocating appropriate number of resources towards a particular technology, such as VR, AR, right? So one thing that I think is separate of IP that's immensely important in relation to VR, AR, that is becoming an issue within larger organizations, is on this privacy side. And privacy and personal information no longer is just a question of finances, right? As recently as a few years ago, certainly during the Equifax data breach, the question was, oh man, what's going on? My financial data has been stolen, and so what is privacy in relation to financial data? But more recently, attention has been placed on other personal data, in particular biometric data, and that brings up questions of biometric privacy. Illinois, in particular, has a pretty aggressive, comprehensive act. Some of you may have heard about it, BIPA, the Biometric Information Privacy Act, that has been making a lot of headlines recently as large companies such as Facebook have been getting sued and ultimately having to settle these cases. Not necessarily in cases just in Illinois. These cases have ultimately been tried, even though BIPA is an Illinois law, they've been tried in California and really throughout the country elsewhere. When talking about biometric information, we're talking about fingerprints, eye scans, and many other things, and that I'm sure that I don't even know. And while BIPA itself is a pretty broad spanning law, the gist of it is that you need to get people's written consent to be able to collect that sort of information of theirs. So if you're thinking about an organization that has employees, let's say you give somebody a company computer, and that company computer is then allows for fingerprint scanning. That's collection of biometric data, right? And so the approach then for any employer, whether big or small, is that, okay, we need to focus on written agreements with our employees, whereas before might be a question of flying by night a little bit, certainly for an entrepreneur that might not have systems in place to have written agreements with everybody, might not have that kind of leverage. Now it becomes much more important really for anybody that in any way collects biometric information to have these written agreements in place. And in this particular instance, when we're talking about VR, there is the potential of collecting a lot of biometric information. And quite frankly, that's the value in using this technology for a lot of companies. So that just stresses that companies need to focus on getting their systems in place so that they are getting the necessary permissions from people that are using this sort of technology, whether it's employees, strategic partners, or users. In terms of service privacy policies, that's certainly something that can help get the necessary permissions, but just putting language on a website is not necessarily something that is going to create an enforceable contract. And so with that, that's certainly something that needs to be paid more attention to. Excuse me, I'm being asked to wrap up, and so I'll be happy to answer any questions whenever the time comes.
Yeah, thank you, Ilya. And to be clear, we will be, I mean, the majority of this actual event is going to be directed towards Q&A from the audience. So this is, this intro portion is very much just for you guys to get a feel for the different people who are up here presenting and what their areas of expertise are. And with that, I will allow a speed round of presentation going to JD Houvener, who is the owner of Bold Patents Law Firm. And JD, are you ready to go and unmuted?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
With that, and yeah, I've got a lot of slides, so I'll be expecting to hear from you quite a bit.
Sounds good. And thank you very much, Nat, and thank you, Tom Packard as well, and VRAR Chicago for inviting me out. This is great. Definitely a first time for me. And thank you to Verbella too. So this is great. Pretty fun experience. Like I said, just hold the questions till we do that at the end. We'll do a big focus on that. I may try to pace around. That's kind of fun. Get off the podium a little bit. So I've got a law firm, Bold Patents Law Firm. It's obviously focused on patent law, but it's part of a big suite of intellectual property that is part of the law. So let's go to the next slide. And one more, please. Time about myself, but the 4 areas of law that I'd like to offer is I've got experience with are patents, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets. Kind of make up the big 4 pillars of intellectual property that really any business, especially those in virtual reality, should be thinking of. I'm going to focus this chat on patents and trade secrets because those go hand in hand. So the first and the fourth bullet there, but definitely can field questions on trademarks and copyrights as well. Go to the next slide. And first section is patent law. So next slide, please. Really the big exchange for patent law. It's about an inventor, giving away their invention, their baby, oftentimes what they've come up with, their innovation, telling the world about it. And the government says, you know what? That's awesome. Thank you for that. We're going to give you 20-year monopoly to be the only one in the whole country to be the one that can make, use, sell that invention. So that's the premise of patent law in a nutshell. Next slide. So a lot of people ask, hey, does what I just told you about, does my invention qualify? Is it patent eligible? And for most folks in computer science and computer implemented inventions, including virtual reality, they'll fall under group number 4, which is a process. It's what all software inventions are. It's a series of steps, and they're hoping that they're the first inventor in the world that's come up with that. But definitely, there's a lot of peripheral, devices, wearables, assemblies, even ways that things can be produced in three-dimensional world that are patentable as well. Lots of things qualify. Very few things don't. Things that don't qualify are laws of nature, algorithms only. A lot of subtleties that are still kind of shaking out within the Supreme Court. Next slide. I wanted to show you guys the very first virtual reality patent. This goes way back to, I can't see the slide, but I think it's the 60s when this thing was first created. Augments what people are actually able to see in real life and gives them a bigger periphery. Not a brand new, technically brand new field. It's been around for quite a while. I thought I'd just show a brief intro on the next slide of the sort of the next version. If you would go to the next slide. Okay, I guess we may have skipped one. I thought we had a slide on a more recent patent. But that's okay. So how do you get a patent? You've got to meet 3 basic requirements of novelty, non-obviousness, and has to have some sort of utility. Novelty means new, and not just in the country, but in the whole world. Examiners are going to be looking at that. Got what it takes. Even if it's brand new, it can't just be an obvious version of something else that came before it. Utility has to do with, hey, does it have a benefit? Is it really one or people or entities out there, state or might have a ability to benefit, have a clear way of helping and providing a utility. Slide. Slide, please, Matt.
Sure.
Three main types of patents out there, and so for most inventions that people think of when they hear invention, it's things that move, mechanical gears and gadgets and headsets, and certainly software. Those are all utility patents. The majority of all patents that have been filed today. In fact, there's over 10 million of utility patents that have been granted of patent law. Design patents are those that cover just three-dimensional objects. Okay, they just protect the ornamental shape of unique designs. Plant patents are the least common. There's only about 100,000 that have been issued. And those are what you think. It's actual botanical plants. And you can get a patent on specific varietal of plants. So, slide, please. So here's a recent augmented reality patent. I just wanted to show you guys an abstract. I think just based on timing, we may not be able to go through this. I just wanted to show you what an abstract looks like and what claim language looks like. This is one that was issued Disney last month, and they're claiming you can kind of see the structure of the claim over there on the right side. Got a numbered claim there, and okay, it looks like the audio is kind of cutting in and out. Apologize about that. But hopefully you guys can hear me. So yeah, it's a multi-part claim. You can see the different elements there, where it has a VR system, a physical interaction system, and then there's a wearer with a headset, image of the virtual world, and then there's a commanding by a certain robot control. Go to the next slide. I've got an image. You can kind of see this is you can just picture Disney thinking this will be sort of an attraction or an amusement where they're going to move physical objects same time as the virtual space. So it's sort of a simultaneous movement control. We're actually grabbing devices and they're able to control the physical environment, the real world environment, to line up with the virtual world. Kind of see on the right side what it means to put together, what do figures or pictures look like to describe a virtual reality invention. And it's flowcharts. Amazing detailed flowcharts is really what we need to show the information flow and the overall process. Like I said, that's really what's being claimed at the end of the day. Slide. We'll just kind of go through just to make sure to be expedient on time. Let's go switch to trade secrets. Be a few slides down, Matt. Kind of give people a flavor for the other subject. And what I'll do is I'll make these slides available for anybody that's interested. I want to make sure we're keeping enough time for Q&A. In fact, I'll use the upload tool here to upload that PDF for an ABC patent flow. I don't know if that actually came through.
Yeah, JD, I've got trade secret law in front of me. Is that the one you're seeing?
Yeah. We got KFC and Coca-Cola, some of these, classic trade secrets that people think of. Let's go to the next slide. Body of law about protecting information, and that's really what a trade secret is. It's nothing. It doesn't have to be as groundbreaking as the Coca-Cola recipe. It really is any kind of business information that's not readily available and is valuable in general, to a competitor, for example. And you're making efforts to keep it secret. That is the definition of a trade secret. So, any business that is profitable, I argue, has several trade secrets within their company. So, let's go to the next slide. So this is what I said. These are the big three requirements. Do you have a trade secret? I would say yes. If you're in business, you have trade secrets. In many cases, those can be protected under patent law if you wanted to move Or that if you wanted to publish them or look to monetize them outside the company, either through sale or licensing. Slide, please. Like I said, they don't have to be this huge, super secret, game-changing type of information. It can be data about your customers, business processes, manufacturing methods, certainly formulas, software, and processes. So it really is a pretty big open source. And this is something that, while it's a good thing to know you have trade secrets, it can be a little overwhelming to realize you've got to now think about how do you protect that owner from these secrets when getting out, right? And how you deal with employee turnover. And it puts a lot of focus on employment law. Slide. Great place to start talking about them is when you hire employees and making sure your employment contracts are all straight away. And if they're leaving, make sure you re-clarify what obligations they have. Modality. So next slide. Ways to enforce misappropriation. Now that's the word it's called. It's not infringement of a trade secret, it's misappropriating it. So there's lots of different ways. You got to monitor employees and even ex-employees, if they're at certain high levels. Famous case just came down between Waymo and Uber a year and a half or 2 years ago, settled for $500 million. So really a nice feather in the cap to the trade secret law. It didn't actually go to a federal decision. It was settled out of court. A lot of us attorneys were hoping there'd be a decision so we could learn more about what the law says about it. But it does definitely say there's certainly value in trade secrets that in this case was scared enough to pay off Google $500 million. Next slide. Cool. Well, I think that's it. We'll yield the rest of the time for Q&A. Happy to chat about anything about trademarks, copyrights, patents, or trade secrets. Everybody?
All right, thank you, JD. And from there, we will move on to our Q&A. So we've got Q&A, a slide up right now that kind of explains how Q&A is going to work, which is that if you would like to ask a question, you will go to the top, the menu on the top left of your screen. You will click Raise Hand. You should also have a button on the bottom center of your screen that allows you to raise your hand. When you do raise your hand, I should be able to see that in the list here, and I will try to call on people as much as possible in the order that they have raised their hands. But beyond that, ultimately we'll be there to call on you guys to ask your questions. So we're going to see who's the brave one that actually asks the first question here. As soon as I see a hand go up, I will in fact call on you. And there we go. We have Charlie Athanas. So Charlie, if you don't mind, I'm going to unmute the audience real quick. You should be able to turn your microphone on and ask a question. Let's see if you can do that.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I hear you.
All right. So my question is, there was recently a sort of partnership collaboration between Niantic and the people from Pokemon Go and Punch Drunk, which is an immersive theater company. So I'm just curious, are we looking to see a lot of issues come up in terms of theater rights? This bizarre collaboration between games and theater that's happening, and do you see a bunch of legal issues for that?
Who wants to take that one?
I'm happy to, Charlie. So I'm thinking that what's going to be happening here is that the exact same adaptation rules, certainly on the copyright side, that exist for example, if you're trying to adapt a book into a film or into a play in a theater, right? The same exact laws are going to apply. It's just a question of what is it that people are thinking of now? Are they thinking of these potential opportunities, as you put it? If yes, then the contract will not be particularly different in legal terms than it would be irrespective of what the media is that's being used and adapted.
Anyone else want to chime in at all or no? I thought I saw Ross's hand go up for a second there.
We're going to start. I think we're going to start seeing a lot of innovative uses of some of this technology, especially given just the current circumstances that we're in. Some of them are going to be new. Some of them are going to be kind of new imaginings of old ideas. So during COVID, I've seen drive-ins make a very big comeback. I've seen people try to stream Netflix or other streaming apps to multiple people, and part of that is creating a new market need, and some of it might be potentially lucrative. So I think that's going to be hosting a lot of new legal problems, but I agree with the other panelists. I think that largely it's going to be shoehorned into the existing laws we have, and I think a lot of this is going to be creatures of contract. So I think depending on how these agreements are structured, if there are agreements at all, we might just see a lot of paper being shuffled around. But if we start seeing some, innovative uses that are being made, and the question comes down to, is this infringing or is it not infringing, we might see some interesting legislation and, certainly litigation come out of it too.
All right. Up next, we have John Adler. Oh, I see your hand up in the front there. There you go.
This question is for Ross. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. Ross, so you had mentioned game design and liability issues in relation to that, such as motion sickness. How does a developer address this and protect themselves in regards to users?
In a word, carefully. And we've seen some things happen with different development in what are you trying to get folks to do. If you have an app like Beat Saber, you're having people moving in particular ways. I think that from like a legal perspective, I think we're going to be starting to see some of this from a patent perspective and some of it from a personal liability and tort perspective as well. I've seen a couple personal injury lawsuits filed against the makers of Beat Saber because they think that it's going to cause repetitive stress disorder, or people, pulled their shoulder, or, misaligned their arms, or sprained themselves getting too intense playing the game. And something that it reminds me of, because we do have some precedent for it, is similar lawsuits that were filed in the late 90s against Nintendo and the makers of Mario Party, because certain mechanics that were being used on the joysticks were causing people to give themselves friction burns, cuts, or even broken fingers by trying to rotate the joystick too fast during certain mini games. So I think that as developers are developing new mechanics and trying to work within an existing patchwork of precedent that isn't necessarily hard precedent, I think the best thing that they can be doing is reaching out to industry organizations to figure out what kind of mechanics might lend themselves to potential injury, or what kinds of accessibility options can be implemented in games to make them most accessible. So implementing things to counteract color blindness, or alternative control schemes, or controllers themselves. The more versatile you can make a game, the more options people have to use it safely, and ultimately that'll mean you can avoid the most liability.
All right. Next question. As I was gonna say, any other panelists, if you guys want to chime in, you guys just gotta kind of chime in, unmute yourselves and talk, because it's hard for me to watch both of you at the same time. But without that, I will go to Elmer Thorson.
Hi, I was just wondering, as far as VR, AR platforms as they become more popular, do we understand how this is going to interact with the ADA? Because I know that there have been recent lawsuits from companies that have not kept their websites ADA compliant. So I was just wondering about the regulatory burden for VR, AR technologies as they move forward in relation to the ADA.
All right, panelists, I'm gonna let you guys sort of jump on this. Whoever's gonna go? Go ahead.
So I think that you will see it certainly over time. You'll start to see applications similar to websites, right? It's not a new issue for websites, even if lawsuits start to spring up. For websites, the issue has been going on for well over a decade with the ADA, probably multiple decades. And when that initially became a question of whether websites are subject to the ADA and whether they need to be ADA compliant. The analogies being used there were with regular brick and mortar locations, right? I think that the leap nowadays from website to VR technology is much less than the leap from brick and mortar to website would have been 20 years ago. So I think it's a question not of if, but of when. So certainly developers should keep the ADA in mind. Now there are aspects of the ADA that might create exemptions for situations in which the ADA would not apply to a particular situation. But I do think that as a general matter, it'll definitely be something to keep track of.
All right. Looks like our next question is going to be coming from Tom Packard.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. My question is for all of you, and it's kind of a two-part question. First one is, when you were in law school, kind of studying this stuff and figuring out what area you wanted expertise in, what was the most wow case study that you found while you were in law school relating to AR, VR, and immersive technologies? And then once you were practicing, what was your most wow experience that you interacted with? Personally would be ideal, but then, or maybe just someone else, one of your buddies had a case that was just really incredible. Like interesting, unique kind of thing.
I think on this one, I should probably just go down the line and get all three of you to answer on that one. So I'll start with Ilya, just because it looks like you're on this end.
Sure. So in terms of law school specifically, couldn't tell you of a single example. I don't even know that I knew what virtual reality was in law school, which wasn't all that long ago, let's say 10 years ago. But for reference, I didn't even know what intellectual property meant until the end of my first year in law school, when that all of a sudden became, a topic that my other friends were looking into, and then, something that I ended up learning about secondhand, and then later, taking the class. In practice, however, I'll say that my biggest experience with VR and what really showed me how important the area would be was actually not on any sort of legal practice side, but on a marketing side. Back in not that long ago, I want to say 2016, we had an event where my firm was presenting just as a vendor, and we wanted to bring swag, and we have this great strategic partner that we work with who's very good at not just giving you a product, but really thinking through strategically on what it is that the item is going to be that you're giving away as swag at a conference or such. And the conference was related to film, and at the time, he suggested that we do these headsets. Now, not anything super tech intensive. You've probably seen many times at this point this swag of just the shell headset that you insert a cell phone into. I don't know, the units themselves might cost, at the time, maybe between $10 and $15, right? So we had these shell headsets as swag, and we were lawyers in an event where people were not interested in talking to lawyers, and this thing of swag probably led to 40 people that otherwise would not have talked to my colleagues and me, because who wants to talk to lawyers at a vendor showcase for film. Probably 40 people that wouldn't have otherwise talked to us came and talked to us because they were interested in getting this piece of swag. And at that point, this thing was entirely new, right? And then, I don't know, within 6 months, probably everybody was doing it, and you've seen these pieces since then. But for me, that showed that, hey, this space is important, it's of interest to people, and people will be involved in this space going forward.
I would just say in law school, I can't, I was just trying to rack my brain. I can't think of a case study specifically, so I don't have a great answer. I'm sorry on that. I mean, but practicing, I thought it was pretty cool doing video conferencing, to be honest. I mean, this cheesy answer, but this is right here, this Verbella kind of virtual reality experience is the most wow. And this is the most wow in terms of VR that I've seen for our practice. Do have a lot of clients in the space, and I'm not going to speak to that directly for obvious reasons. And because it's been moving so quickly, I was looking through real quickly as you asked that question. I don't think we have any that have been published or granted in the space to speak directly to. So a little limited as far as what I can share, but it's a wonderful industry, and what it's done is it's allowed a completely new environment for creating, and there's just innovation everywhere. It's just wide open. Really, there's so much potential to. That's all I've got.
All right, Ross.
Thank you for the question. It's a really interesting one. So for me, law school wasn't that long ago. Law school was about 10 years ago for me, but that'll make the story hit home even harder. So in my first year, all lawyers in first year in law school take a class called torts, and it relates to personal injury and slip and fall kinds of cases. And I remember being in that class my first semester, and my professor couldn't have been a day under 150 years old. He was a brilliant man. He had a resume taller than I am, and he had argued in front of the Supreme Court. That's the big Supreme Court, not a state Supreme Court, and had all of this wealth of experience. And when he came into class that first day, I was the only student he had who had a laptop on their desk. Every other student in the room, and this is back in 2011, 2012, everyone was taking paper notes, and I was the only one with a laptop. And his kind of dismissive chide comment on my having a laptop in the front row was, "Huh, can you Twitter on that?" And that just really sunk home for me how brilliant and yet out of touch so many attorneys were with issues of technology and games and this area of law that I wanted to get into so desperately. And I remember that was a big reason that I kind of found my way into doing what I do for a living. But I remember when I was organizing my first law summit here in Chicago, and I was meeting with video game law practitioners who had been doing this for a living and have been doing it for decades, and who had practiced in film and entertainment and had done everything from patents to every kind of law under the sun. I got a chance to talk to Ross Dannenberg, who is a fantastic patent attorney and has been doing patents on video games for decades at this point. And he had put together a patent for a game called Eternal Darkness on the GameCube back in the early 2000s. And this patent covered the idea of a sanity meter in a horror survival game, much like a health bar. But the whole notion was you could lose health and you could also lose your sanity. And there was a bar that kept track of how much sanity you had left. And this game was the first to ever do that, and one of the few since, and they got a patent on it. And I thought it was so cool and so interesting that you could literally do what patents do, protect ideas, but protect them in a way that could completely lock down a narrative in a game in a way that I thought was so unique. Part of patents is literally exclusion, and it meant that other people couldn't do that. And when he was one of the speakers for my law summit, I asked him, could this be applied to other things, not just to content in games, but also to mechanics? And he said, yes, there's no reason why not. At the time, going back 30 or even 40 years ago, there was no reason why at that time someone couldn't have patented something like a double jump or a wall slide for a platforming game. And the fact was that just no one thought to do it. But could you imagine what the game development scene would look like if for 20 years no one could have a platforming game with a wall jump or a double slide or any other mechanic like that? It kind of broke my brain a little bit. And I started going down a rabbit hole looking into other patents and other things that were legally protected, and finding out that Sega had a patent on the corkscrew run from Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Kind of blew my mind. So it was so interesting to see this disconnect between technology and law, because there are people who do both, and they're sitting on this panel and they're in this room right now. So I think it's really cool to see how it's changing and developing. And to echo what JD says, I think this is the first time this has ever been done, that a group of attorneys in the game and tech space have gotten together in VR to talk about VR and the legal implications thereof. This might be the most meta thing I've ever been a part of. So thanks for having us here.
Glad to do it. So John Adler, I know you've had your hand up for a while, but I'm gonna go to Ray Katos just because we do like to go to people who haven't asked a question yet. So Ray, and I know you're in a VR headset, so we'll give you a little bit of leeway just to make sure you got your microphone running.
Okay, Matt, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. Thanks everybody for being here. Great presentations. I wanted to ask really a two-part question. One is the doctrine of work for hire and how that relates to virtual reality. And secondly, could you comment at all on the, how can I say, the advisability of signing a work for hire agreement versus a distinct copyright assignment?
Guessing that one's more towards JD, but I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, the work for hire agreements are contracts, and I generally I've been more and more conservative these days in saying I only do federal law. I mean, that is state contracts law, so I mean, it is going to depend on what state you're in. But speaking about them generally, the idea is that it's a very formulaic way of contracting, such that when you hire someone, the intellectual property that they develop for you, you own 100% of it.
So I can comment a little bit further on it. So when you're talking about work for hire versus a copyright assignment, right? In both of those instances, whoever it is that is the contributor, they're ultimately transferring all of the ownership of the content that was created. So I don't know that that's the two things that are worth comparing. Now, there are differences in outcomes from the two. For example, if something is not a work for hire, then the person that created it is still the author, even if they transfer ownership of the product, right? With work for hire, the company that is doing the hiring, they're going to be deemed the author from the very beginning, not just the owner, but also the author. And as an author, not even so much in the US, but in many countries abroad, an author has what are called moral rights that they might be able to somehow impact how what they've created is used. So if something is a work for hire, then that particular outcome is eliminated based on this person's not being an author, even if they don't own the product. But with work for hire in general, right, that's really at one end of the spectrum, where the person that did something doesn't own anything. They don't really have any rights whatsoever. Certainly, if there's no tail compensation after they've performed the work. On the other end of the spectrum is that the person that created something owns everything, right? And whoever it is that hired them owns nothing. And then there's this everything in between, right? One party can own something and then license it back to the other, or vice versa. It really runs the gamut as far as what it is that can be agreed to in writing. That's really the one golden rule. It has to be agreed to in writing, but otherwise the world is your oyster and you can do it. So with work for hire, really the question is, are you getting paid enough? right? If you're going to, I've talked to some people that have philosophical aversions to work for hire. And I suppose I understand that, but the ultimate question is, okay, well, if you're getting paid enough, wouldn't you be okay giving away all the rights and just doing something truly for hire? And the answer there will vary from person to person.
I think I actually have my own follow-up to that question, but I know John's been waiting for a while, so I'm going to let him go.
All right, thanks. I have a question. It's actually for three of you. Let's say I'm an entrepreneur and I just started a business and I'm developing a product and application. The right time during this process to approach an attorney, whether it be with UJD in regards to a potential patent application, or Ilya and Ross with contracts or IP issues. When would be a good time to start thinking about talking to an attorney?
Well, I'll go first. I think it'd be great for you to explore. I mean, if you think what you've created, you got something new, and you don't think anyone else has it, especially if you're in the industry, you ought to see if it's patentable. And so at least hire a patent attorney to conduct a search and give you their opinion on patentability, and scope will be lock down the technology, get at least a patent pending, and go from there.
So there's a difference between being able to benefit from an attorney's services versus just starting a conversation with somebody. And I don't think that there is a time that's too early to start a conversation with somebody who just happens to be an attorney that's in this space. You know, it's part of the reason why people network at events like this and in general. I can tell you that attorneys make for potentially a dour but solid focus group because we have these built-in obligations of confidentiality regardless of whether somebody's a client or not. So a question that comes up a lot when somebody has this new idea that they think is going to make a bunch of money and they're trying to, let's say, raise funds or just get people's feedback, they're worried about having an NDA in place, right? And there's the practical aspect with NDAs that, okay, well, it would be great practice to have one, but how practical is it to ask this particular person whose advice I want, whose feedback I want, to first sign an NDA, which is it's a barrier to talking to somebody, right? So if you happen to know attorneys and you want to just pitch your ideas, assuming that they're fine with it, to these attorneys, you can feel comfortable that they will not take your idea and go steal it and use it because their license depends on it. And then it's also worth adding that from my perspective as somebody that might be getting talked to by somebody, just as a business matter, I would like to have a conversation with somebody sooner than later because it just increases the chances that that person later on, potentially hires us for actual business if we've, somehow contributed on the front end informally. In terms of when an attorney can actually provide services, there probably needs to be some sort of opportunity that you, the inventor or business owner, have that the attorney can support, certainly in terms of any sort of documentation.
You want to add something on that one, Russ?
I agree. I think sooner is better than later, and later is better than never. When I'm working with clients, I always try to meet with them at a point after they've had a shower thought, after they've had a great idea, after they've written it on a napkin, but before they're ready to finish their project and take it to market. I think that my other panelists made some good points that, the earlier in the process you approach professionals, the earlier they can start giving you some very candid and practical advice on how to better your situation or better your product or better your strategy. But you also don't want to approach them when it's premature. You might not be taken seriously, or you might not be able to afford services that they're offering. They might be in a position to say, well, I can't help you until you bring me something more. I need more than an idea. I need something in hand. So if you're asking the question, when should I start talking to someone? If you're having that thought, that probably means you have something tangible that's, almost at a place that's ready to be legally protected or could use the benefit of some advice. So it sounds like you might be right at that tipping point.
All right, our next question is actually coming from Facebook. And Francis Wong has asked, generally he asks how patent law has an impact on the AR and VR industry in terms of pros and cons. If we want to frame that a little bit, I would just say, from the perspective of patent law itself, software patents, again, in my own experience, are pretty hard to get. But do we see that from a software and a hardware perspective? Do we see patent law, really sort of driving people to be a little more innovative and try new tech, or do we see that as, kind of like with Apple and Samsung, just having thousands of patents against each other on smartphones and constantly suing each other, and nobody really winning anything? It just seems to go back and forth quite a bit. So yeah, it's just in general the pros and cons of how patent law is being applied to AR and VR, both from a hardware and a software perspective.
Sure. Yeah, and preface by no means do we claim to be the VR patent specialists or anything, but certainly we have some experience with vendors that are in the VR space, and been coming in more and more. I'm not, by no means are they the majority of our inventors, but it seems to be, like I said, it really is open, and there seems to be a lot of potential. There, in terms of patent eligibility, there has been some question as to computer implemented inventions and what's eligible. Was sort of the bunch of patents that are simply doing what people have done in real life, but just now doing it on the computer. Those are now invalid, and they're also those that are just formulaic or pure algorithm without any real practical application. Those are not going to be patent eligible. But as long as there's a real process that you can demonstrably point to, and if there's a new type of communication, a new analysis happening, benefit, and benefit is really broad, including entertainment can be a benefit. It's all eligible, and the restrictions on software that have sort of been scaring people are really limited. There's not that many. There's a whole lot of innovation that is eligible with VR. So it's a big positive side. Negative side, I'm a little biased. I can't think of a negative side, downside to it, because I don't see a downside to VR. I think it only really presents opportunities for people to connect in ways that they couldn't have otherwise. So happy to answer any follow-ups or more specific questions related to that.
I'm kind of curious to actually get Ross's, because again, just some of the things you were speaking about in terms of like gaming aspects being protected. If you start, thinking that through towards the concepts of being able to move a certain way or teleport in VR space, or, honestly, even just some of the different things that are happening right now with hardware, with retroreflective lenses and, the patents that we're seeing coming out of Apple and Facebook. What are your thoughts there?
Definitely a mixed bag. The way that we have intellectual property is structured on exclusion and monopolies, and that's how we incentivize innovation. Is we're trying to encourage people to make new things and make new ideas and reward them with an exclusive hold on the market as a benefit. So that's the pro for development, is if you make something really cool, that's the best way to do it. You can control it and have an exclusive monopoly over it. On the other hand, when you talk about innovations that should be available to everyone just for the medium to work, definitely cuts both ways. In the VR and AR space, if you're saying that people can't click to jump to move to a particular place, you have to use a different kind of mechanic or a different kind of control scheme. That's really going to hamstring the industry when it comes to development. So it definitely works in both directions. I've seen some developers come up with some very interesting workarounds when they don't have a license to use a particular technology, but there's also patent trolls. This is one of those signature moments on the panel when I'll put on my lawyer hat and say it depends, and it's always on a case-by-case basis. But I think so far from what I've seen, people seem to be innovating and getting around patent limitations for no other reason than the fact that patents tend to be very expensive and outside the reach of most small developers, and sometimes that's where some of the best ideas come from. So when you have a lot of brilliant people who are innovating in a space where they're not legally locking down what they're doing and instead are far more interested in creating an atmosphere of sharing and making and creating, that's when you start seeing some really great collaborations and some really great inventions. So I'm not too worried about the industry. I think every time that someone tries to close a single door on a particular kind of innovation, you're going to see every window in that house open up by everyone else who tries to create a collaborative marketplace and not an exclusive one.
But that actually kind of leads back to the combination question that I had as a follow-up to John, and in terms of like when is the right time to actually speak to an attorney to try and protect the work that you're having done or the thing that you're inventing. As a developer, let's assume that as a developer you are doing some work for somebody, and maybe the technology that you're developing, it is something new, it is something unique. And you're working with somebody else to develop it, but the paperwork isn't really in place. So there is no real contract regarding who owns it or who doesn't own it. And I guess the question then would be, okay, so where does that fallback go? Like as the developer, does the developer pretty much have the exclusive on it because they're the ones who built it, so they own the copyright? Or if they were working with somebody, without necessarily having the paperwork, nothing's patented, nothing's contracted the right way, I guess how does somebody who's working with a developer essentially make sure that they have everything they need in place before sharing their idea or giving away their unique concepts, but at the same time taken from both perspectives, from the developer side as well as the business person side, who obviously paperwork protects, but in the absence of paperwork, where do you see things falling?
Everything seems to be protected by paper. Non-disclosure agreements are key, and since it's a panel of attorneys, just attorney-client privilege controls as well. So I think that that's probably going to be your first layer of protection for most of that. As a developer, you want to surround yourself with creative minds, because iron sharpens iron, and that's how you really get some great ideas, is by bouncing them off of other people. When it comes to protecting what you're doing from other folks, we have a phrase in game development called the Friends DA, which is just a cute way of saying, I'm telling you something and don't exploit it or steal it, please. It has no legal effect, but there's just an industry standard or a mutual respect between collaborators that if they're sharing things, it's for collaborative and learning purposes and not for thievery.
Anyone else want to chime in on that one? No? All right. Any other questions from the audience? I'm not seeing a whole lot of chatter left on Facebook. We have time for probably one or two more questions, or we could go back to open networking at this point. You guys can all just talk to each other and meet each other, because we do have some new names, at least in the audience, that I have not seen before.
Can I ask a question or two from the audience?
Yeah, sure.
I'm just curious, by show of hands, for those of you who have figured out the raise your hand button, how many of you are attorneys or legal industry professionals? Thank you. Put your hands down. How many of you work as a developer, a creator, or maker in the tech space in some way? Who makes stuff? Cool. I always want to get a feel for who's in the audience and what they're interested in, because it helps us kind of speak to what you want to hear about better.
the question I always want to ask is, okay, so for everybody who didn't raise your hand on either of those, I'm curious what some of you do. How many of you are educators? Okay. All right. Do we have any other questions? Anyone else? You got, this is free access to attorneys. Usually they charge you guys by the minute, or what is it, by 6 minutes? Isn't that how much you guys charge nowadays?
Minutes, yeah.
I guess we're not getting a whole lot of good jokes here. Okay. And so with that, oh wait, we got Louis Gardner. Go ahead.
Quick question. With 3D cameras increasing quality very quickly, we've got these 8K scans of real world environments coming into game design at the moment. And sure, there are people that are scanning real world environments of historical places, historical landmarks, for example. But as we see portable scanning devices, these 4K cameras, 3D cameras, coming into businesses, coming into office locations and scanning something like a workspace, for example, or scanning something like 1871, for example. Has there ever been any legal implications in using real world environments in a game? And do you see anything that could come up from something like a corporation in that regard?
Yes, absolutely, forever and for always. This is a fantastic question because it hits on some current developing technology and something that developers are trying to do constantly. In the constant quest for realism in games, folks are using 3D cameras to capture the world around them and implement that directly into the software that they're making. And while that makes for an extremely realistic perspective in games, it makes your game super authentic, you're running so many legal issues. You've got copyright, trademark, even patent, and especially privacy issues because you're going to be capturing so much more than you expect. Might be copywriting, or you might be capturing, protected skylines. The Chicago skyline or buildings in it have legal protections and require licenses and permissions to be included in particular content. You might be getting people's faces or businesses or disclosing personal information like phone numbers, addresses, or even social security numbers. You never know what you're going to be putting in a game. And on a scale that big, you never know how many people are going to find fault with it. Now, practically, there's some kind of herd immunity to it where a lot of people don't care that that information is being used, or they're not aware that you've used it. But there will be enough actors who do care, who are bothered and are extremely litigious, who will come after you. And some instances where I've seen this happen, I think most often in small to mid game development, and even in AAA, including copyrighted content is a major issue. And when it comes to skylines and buildings, this is a big issue. When you look at a game like Watch Dogs or the Grand Theft Auto series, they have to be very, very careful about what they're including, even when it comes to parody. So two examples I'll point to very quickly, because I know the other panelists will probably have some to contribute to this as well, given their expertise in the area. One of them was the game Resistance: Fall of Man, which was a launch title for the PS3 back in 2006, I think. Big. It takes place in England and features very prominently a particular church, an abbey in UK. And the current owners of that church were not too keen on it being included in a game which featured monsters and zombies and all kinds of horror-themed, creepy, crawly nightmares. So they brought several lawsuits against those makers, which were extremely expensive. I believe that both of them ended up settling, so we didn't get any good case law out of it. But depending on what your level of safety net is, that's the kind of lawsuit that could break your company and keep you from making your second game. So that was a case where something was taken very literally, but also you're not safe if you're trying to play the satire or parody fair use game, because the makers of Grand Theft Auto famously included a parody of a strip club from Los Angeles called the Pigpen, I think it was called the Pigpen, and they parodied it by calling it the Playpen. And it featured similar stylings, colors, fonts, and other things that were protected under either trademark or trade dress, and even copyright as well. And that lawsuit was extremely high profile and expensive, ending in settlement as well. But if you're, a small indie, these are things you want to avoid. So if the idea is you're going to 3D capture an entire environment or build an entire virtual world reminiscent of the actual world, know that though you can create a virtual world, you did not create the real world that came first, and as such, you have no legal claim over it. So extra careful. Talk to lawyers, talk to accountants, talk to marketers and other professionals before doing anything.
Incredible insight. Thank you.
And just to add on to what Ross had said, just practically, depending on what stage of business evolution you're at, the question might not be what is legally correct and what does the law say. It might be, am I going to get sued in the first place, or how likely that might happen. Because as Ross alluded, yes, these things can get expensive. With copyright issues, there is, some protection in the sense that a defendant that is getting sued for copyright infringement does have a decent shot of being able to claim attorney's fees if they are victorious, but that's not a given. And before you can successfully claim that, you would need to have presumably attorneys to help you fight back whatever lawsuit there might be. So these are just practicalities that relate to resources that somebody might have at a particular stage. If you're Google or Oracle, you can fight a copyright battle for over a decade and go to the Supreme Court, and that's all fine, which is what's going on right now. But for everybody else, we actually have to think about real world implications of taking risks.
An abundance of asking or requesting for written approval of scanning before doing so. I appreciate that feedback as well. Thank you.
Curious, actually, because you guys brought this up now, just, based on that question, the flip side of that same question would be, I guess, in terms of, privacy protection for people who are scanning, so if, we're expecting in the very near future to start seeing, I would say we're a couple years away, but like you're going to see augmented reality glasses that are effectively doing 3D scanning of the space all the time, or I know the iPhone, I guess the new iPhone has a LiDAR scanner in it. If you're somebody who kind of, I guess, doesn't want to be scanned, I guess at what point, I guess the rule I've always heard is that my rights end where yours begin. But basically, if someone's walking around with these iPhones that have these scanning technologies just built into them, what are we looking at there in terms of lawsuits? Assuming that those things are being used for either anything from actually doing like actual scanning to save a 3D environment versus playing a game that's just using that data.
It's going to be interesting. Somewhere that I've seen something akin to what you're talking about is at a lot of the conventions that used to be held before 2020, like GDC and PAX and Gamescom. Something that started becoming commonplace was colored name tags identifying your personal comfort level with people taking your photo if you were in public. So in the same way that folks were having ribbons on their name tags that disclosed their pronouns to other people, green lanyards might mean don't take my photo, yellow lanyards might mean ask my permission first, and red ones might be I'm in public, go ahead, take my picture. Because there's a lot of money behind those crowd shots at conventions like that. They wind up on websites, and depending on who the subject of the photo is, they may or may not want to be affiliated or used as a poster child for a particular convention if they're just visiting. So I started seeing a lot of things like that, and just being 2020 and seeing how grumpy some folks are when it comes to just wearing masks in public and them asserting that that's a right that they have. I see no reason to think that people would not be extremely salty about their likeness or render being used without their permission. I see that's something that they would be very grumpy about. So who knows? There might be a societal aspect to it where we just have to teach each other to ask permission for things like that, and that's going to become an industry standard. Or there might be a technological limitation on this, the same way that there are wallets being sold with protections to keep your identity from being stolen off your driver's license or off your credit cards. Maybe people are going to start marketing certain kinds of makeup or certain kinds of clothing or fabrics that will mess up photos or mess up that technology. This is a good question for the fashion law people as well, because I know some are working to that end for garments and fabrics and other implemented wearable technologies that might shake this up.
All right. Well, with that, I think we are going to wrap it up. Before you guys go, I do want to point out these are our social tags up on the screen right now. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. We do post a lot of information. I hope to see you guys again. As I said before, we are hoping in the very near future to be getting back to actually having some version of a physical event, although the plan from this point forward, I'm relatively certain, is that we are going to try to always have a virtual component from this point forward. We obviously still have to work out the details of how exactly that's going to work once we do transition back to live and physical. But in the meantime, please follow us and we'll keep you posted. This is, again, for those of you who haven't been here before, this is a monthly event. These are our topics coming up for the remainder of the year. These are the dates and the topics. In terms of what industries we're going to be approaching. Next month will be emergency response. And with that, I do want to say once again, thank you to our panelists. Their contact information is available on the VRARchicago.com webpage. We will be posting the presentation slides up on the VRARchicago.com, this actual event page, as well as a link to this video, which has been streamed and will be recorded and sent and live pretty much forever on Facebook, on our Facebook page. Beyond that, once again, thank you, JD and Ross and Ilya. And thanks again to our sponsors, Verbella, Bundle AR, and 1871. And with that, I'm going to unmute the room and let everybody start talking again and having some networking. If you guys want to do some, we found the clapping button, great. All right, the room is unmuted. You guys should all be able to talk in your mics again. I'm going to spatialize the sound, which means that you'll be able to hear people close to you better than people who are far away. And yeah, thank you. We hope to see you next month. Have a great one.
How'd it go?
It went good. It's interesting. It's not as easy as it looks. I got better as the time went on because, you start to notice little things like, for instance, like where your mouse is. Like you don't want obviously your avatar and stuff like that, but you're trying to like make it as, you don't want that showing and stuff like that. So yeah, it got interesting along the way, but the talk was interesting too, actually.
Good. Yeah. Ray,
Cool.
listening.
Yeah. I didn't think I was going to be as interested in it as I was, but this is a very fascinating topic, especially when they started talking about copyright and all that kind of stuff of scanning and permission and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, the program actually breaks open a lot of really interesting subjects that you didn't really know before, and then you're like, oh wow, that's really neat. So
Yeah,
I recommend checking it out again in the future if you want.
I will. I'm very interested in the healthcare one and education. But yeah. All right. Yeah, absolutely. Do you want like everything, or do you want